The views and opinions of the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network. Good Sunday afternoon. It's 2 minutes after 4. It's the 20th day of November 2022. And for those people who are my close friends and family, you will know that today is a difficult day for me. 10 years ago today, my son Kyle went home to be with the Lord. And he would have been 15 this year. Taller than me with a mop of curly, bouncy, huge afro that he had. And I miss him desperately every day. So today we're going to be talking, as advertised, about FTX and cryptocurrency and all manner of other things. But I just wanted to start the show with some of Kyle's favorite music. He loved Coldplay. And to say, Kyle, I miss you. I love you. Right. So today, the majority of the show, I think, will be centered around FTX, obviously, and equally important to me, cryptocurrency, and not cryptocurrency, sorry, carbon credits and the ways in which the world, the Bahamas, are able to finance climate change adaptation and mitigation. But we begin today's political review with FTX, which is the biggest story of the week in our politics and in our national affairs, I believe. The fracas over the bankruptcy of FTX Trading Limited is now elevated to the level of a U.S. liquidator accusing the government of the Bahamas of flaunting a U.S. court-ordered stay. That's right. And the snowball just keeps getting bigger. This back and forth is the latest twist in the scramble to secure what's left of the FTX assets. And the latest development, of course, is U.S. regulators have called for former CEO Sam Bankman-Fried to testify before a House Financial Services Committee in December to answer for the collapse of FTX. As listeners may recall, FTX Trading and 134 affiliates filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Delaware a week ago Friday. But on Thursday past, the Securities Commission of the Bahamas, in the exercise of its power as the regulator, acting under the authority of an order made by the Supreme Court of the Bahamas, took the action of directing the transfer of all digital assets of FTX Digital Markets Limited to a digital wallet controlled by the Commission for Safekeeping, quote unquote. The regulator said it took these actions to protect the interests of clients and creditors under its jurisdiction. I want to reiterate something here so that people understand what's happening. FTX Digital Markets is a Bahamian registered company and digital exchange. It is a subsidiary of FTX Trading Limited. FTX Trading Limited is the US registered company that operates as a cryptocurrency derivatives exchange. That company builds a platform for professional trading firms. Understanding this is essential to understanding what's going on at the moment and why our jurisdiction is in the crosshairs of this global FUBAR. And here's why. FTX Digital Markets Limited is a company incorporated in the Bahamas and operates under the digital assets business, operates as a digital assets business under the Digital Assets and Registered Exchanges Act 2020, the much touted DARE Act. This entire mess is ultimately going to be seen as a test for the security of the DARE Act, the strength and integrity of the Bahamas regulatory regime, and perhaps even a test of the Bahamas' respect and adherence to the rule of international law. So even though this is above most people's head and out of most people's reach in terms of the money involved, this is a big deal. And the move made by the Security Commission of the Bahamas has been characterized by FTX Trading Limited, that's the US company now in bankruptcy and scrapping to recover billions in lost investor funds, as, quote, credible evidence that the government of the Bahamas directed unauthorized access to its systems in order to obtain digital assets after FTX had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the US. FTX Trading also blasted the Bahamian Joint Provisional Liquidators, who were appointed by the Supreme Court to oversee the winding up of FTX Digital in the Bahamas, for filing a Chapter 15 bankruptcy petition in the Southern District of New York. Great coverage, by the way, by Travis Cartwright Carroll in the Nassau Guardian this week. You should find his story and read it. Of particular relevance for us today is the question of integrity. It is reported that the US lawyers for FTX Trading sent a letter to Brian Sims KC, who's been appointed as counsel for the Bahamian liquidators at PricewaterhouseCoopers. That letter was supposedly sent in response to concerns that unidentified actors, including actors potentially operating out of the Bahamas, were attempting to access the digital assets of FTX. On a subsequent Zoom call, potential avenues of cooperation were discussed, and Sims was allegedly briefed on the debtors' ongoing work and plans to move the Chapter 11 cases forward. According to the US lawyers, on this call, no mention was made of the intention to file the Chapter 15 case, and accordingly, there was no opportunity to discuss venue. In the filing, the lawyers for the US company said, and I'm going to quote them here, the filing of the Chapter 15 case without advance notice and in the Southern District of New York is a blatant attempt to avoid the supervision of this court, that would be the court in Delaware, and to keep FTX digital assets isolated from the administration of the rest of the debtors, which constitute the vast majority of the remainder of the FTX group, unquote. The lawyer said that the appointment of the Bahamian liquidators and recognition of the Chapter 15 case are therefore in serious question. And he said that it appeared that the automatic stay granted by the Delaware court had been flaunted by a government actor, no less. So to be very clear before I continue, this lawyer is saying that our government broke the law and flaunted a U.S. government court order. That's not small things, and that's not a small accusation. So in a filing in the Delaware courts where the U.S. bankruptcy was filed, the U.S. lawyers argued that FTX Trading Limited's Chapter 11 cases were the first filed and pending for almost 5 days before the Chapter 15 case was begun in the Southern District of New York. They argued that the Delaware court should transfer the Chapter 15 case to the Delaware court and issue a stay as necessary to ensure that no proceedings before the Southern District of New York continue until the transfer question is definitively resolved. Meanwhile, the Delaware filing also said that former CEO Sam Bankman-Fried appears to be supporting the joint provisional liquidators in the Bahamas, and I'm going to quote again here, to expand the scope of the FTX digital markets proceeding in the Bahamas, to undermine the Chapter 11 cases, and to move assets from the debtors to accounts in the Bahamas under the control of the Bahamian government, unquote. The Securities Commission of the Bahamas froze FTX's assets last week and applied to the Supreme Court to appoint Sims as a counsel to the court-supervised provisional liquidator. On a separate note as to why the different filings, Sims has pointed out that the majority of FTX businesses operated from the Bahamas and argued that therefore the Bahamas should be the controlling jurisdiction in regard to the liquidation proceedings. Therefore, the JPL, that's Joint Provisional Liquidators, are seeking recognition of the Bahamas liquidation as a foreign proceeding under the U.S. Bankruptcy Code because FTX Digital maintains its center of main interests in the Bahamas, unquote. The U.S. lawyers counter-argue that the fact that there are 102 affiliated debtors before the Delaware court means that the interests of justice are advanced by any related issues concerning FTX Digital Management and its creditors being addressed in Delaware in connection with the filing there. So that's background. And against that background, we must consider the assertions of John Ray III, who was appointed CEO of FTX in bankruptcy, and who said in a separate filing that he had never seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here. And just to give you John Ray's bona fides, the man has 40 years of legal and restructuring experience, and he was the liquidator that oversaw the bankruptcy of Enron. So there's no question of his qualification or credibility. Ray said in the filing that he understands in the Bahamas, corporate funds of the FTX group were issued to purchase homes and other personal items for employees and advisors. He also understood that there does not appear to be documentation for certain of these transactions as loans, and that certain real estate was recorded in the personal name of these employees and advisors on the records of the Bahamas. And to be clear, the political review understands this to be accurate, at the very least with regard to employees allegedly receiving loans and other financial transactions on request with no structure or proper documentation. We understand that in some cases, employees received approval over WhatsApp with emojis. You listening? I hope you're listening. The company went on to say that its co-founders, Sam Bankman-Fried and Gary Wang, were recorded saying that the Bahamian regulators instructed them to make certain post-petition transfers, and that such assets were custodied on fire blocks under the control of the Bahamian government. So, I hope you're all listening. According to these dudes, the government told them to do what they did. And in its latest filing, FTX said that it had secured only a fraction of the digital assets of the FTX group that they had hoped to recover, saying that it has $740 million now held in a new cold wallet, but that they were unable to account for three main gaps in tracked assets. So the question comes down to this. Can we as a jurisdiction, as regulators, as a country, can we be trusted? The next and most crucial element of the story so far, to me, involves the actions of the Security Commission of the Bahamas. Press reports say that several wallets allegedly belonging, and I'm using allegedly and reportedly very specifically here, belonging to FTX were drained of hundreds of millions of dollars in coins late on Friday night. That would be the Friday that the bankruptcy was declared, with much of the funds transferred from Tether, that's a USDT, into stablecoin. The supposedly unauthorized transfers were spotted on November 11th, the same day FTX declared bankruptcy, and were tracked in real time by blockchain people who are, let's call them sleuths on Twitter, leading to a flurry of speculation at the time. The transfers, which totaled $650 million, were thought to be a part of a massive hack targeting the bankrupt company. And of course, I've had I don't know how many conversations talking about this hack of FTX. Well, keep listening. At 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time that night, FTX U.S. General Counsel Ryan Miller called the transfers unauthorized and said that FTX had begun moving the company's remaining assets to cold storage to mitigate the damage. The Securities Commission of the Bahamas had earlier issued a press release saying it was taking action to freeze the assets of FTX digital assets. That same day, FTX released its own statement saying that it had begun allowing the withdrawal of Bahamian funds to comply with the nation's regulators. But as rumors abounded that the unauthorized transfers were the work of Bahamian authorities, listen carefully to this, the Securities Commission of the Bahamas issued a statement pushing back, saying that it had not directed, authorized, or suggested to FTX Digital Markets Limited the prioritization of withdrawals for Bahamian clients. Now, it's not, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to take anybody else's word for what the Securities Commission of the Bahamas said. So here is the text of this statement dated November 12, 2022, from the Securities Commission of the Bahamas website. It reads, the Commission wishes to advise that it has not directed, authorized, or suggested to FTX Digital Markets Limited the prioritization of withdrawals for Bahamian clients. The Commission further notes that such transactions may be characterized as voidable preferences under the insolvency regime and consequently result in clawing back funds from Bahamian customers. In any event, the Commission does not condone the preferential treatment of any investor or client of FTX Digital Markets Limited or otherwise. The next statement from the Securities Commission, also on the website, dated November 14th, that's 2 days later, says, given the magnitude, urgency, and international implications of the unfolding events with regard to FTX, the Commission recognized that it had to and moved swiftly to use its regulatory powers under the Digital Assets and Registered Exchanges Act 2020 to further protect the interests of clients, creditors, and other stakeholders globally of FTX Digital Markets Limited. And the most recent statement from the Securities Commission, also posted on the website, gives some context. It reads as follows. On the 12th of November, 2022, the Securities Commission of the Bahamas, in the exercise of its powers as regulator, acting under the authority of an order made by the Supreme Court of the Bahamas, took the action of directing the transfer of all assets, all digital assets of FTX Digital Markets Limited to a digital wallet controlled by the Commission for safekeeping. Urgent interim regulatory action was necessary to protect the interests of clients and creditors of FDM. Under the Digital Assets and Registered Exchanges Act 2020, the Commission has the authority to apply for a judicial order to protect the interests of clients or customers of a registrant of the Commission under the DARE Act. It is not the understanding of the Commission that FDM is a party to the U.S. Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings. Over the coming days and weeks, the Commission will engage with other regulators and authorities in multiple jurisdictions to address matters affecting the creditors, clients, and stakeholders of FDM globally to obtain the best possible outcome. So what we have here is what seems to be, on the face of it, an about face by the regulator. The regulator made a statement saying, we didn't do this. And 2 days later, he made a statement that said, well, we have to protect our clients, creditors, and other stakeholders. And then they released a subsequent statement saying that, yes, we did do this, and we had authorization to do it. So that looks like a reversal by the regulator, and that raises, I don't know how many questions. So later on in the show, as advertised, we have a special guest, and he and I are going to get into this issue and discuss what FTX and the shenanigans surrounding it might mean for the Bahamas as a nation, for the SCB as a regulator, and for, I believe, the Davis administration as a political administration. It's not going to be pretty, the fallout from this, or at least that's my view. We'll see. And next in TPR, as important as the FTX matter is, there are other matters occurring in the political arena which are maybe a little closer to home. And let's start with Bahamas Power and Light Company Limited, and who knew what and when. Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Philip Davis told Parliament last month that he never received any briefing or saw any papers on the need to execute fuel hedging trades for Bahamas Power and Light to lock in oil prices last fall. But, this is a big, big but. The Minister of Works, Alfred Sears, said in the House of Assembly on Wednesday that a cabinet paper to exactly that effect was addressed to the Minister of Finance, and the Ministry of Finance decided to reject the recommendation after reviewing it. Sears' acknowledgement on Wednesday came after both he and the Prime Minister had both repeatedly insisted in the House of Assembly that they had not had any briefings on the need to carry out the hedge transactions and had seen no documents on it. Despite statements to the contrary, and in the face of questioning by the leader of the opposition, Michael Pintard, Sears' revelation confirmed that recommendations were addressed to the finance minister and that the finance ministry had made the decision not to accept those recommendations. It was the first time Sears has publicly acknowledged that, just as the opposition has asserted, there had indeed been a recommendation to execute the trades last fall. Pintard and the other opposition members seemed surprised that Sears had finally acknowledged that there had been a recommendation from the BPL Hedge Committee and board to execute the trades last fall. After Sears' statement, the opposition leader accused him and the Prime Minister of previously having misled the House. He insisted that Sears' confirmation that he had been aware of the recommendations after he denied this fact over and over again meant that what Pintard framed as a 163% increase in the cost of electricity over the ensuing 13 months was the result of dereliction of duty a decision and bad judgment by the Davis administration. Ever since the Prime Minister announced on October 4th dramatic incremental fuel cost increases for BPL customers starting last month, Pintard has repeatedly hammered the government on the point of fuel hedging, insisting that the failure of the administration to approve the execution of hedge transactions last fall left BPL exposed and has now led to the substantial hikes in the fuel charge for customers because more reasonable oil prices were not locked in. Pintard had told the House of Assembly in October that there was ample evidence that the former FNM administration had a plan in place to maintain the price of fuel in the vicinity of 10.5 cents per kilowatt hour, and that even if it did increase, it would not increase beyond 11.5 cents per kilowatt hour. He said at the time that that information was ignored. Now, let's be clear about a couple of things here. I need you all to understand I'm an Alfred Sayers fan. I supported his run for leader of the party when he challenged Perry Christie. I thought he would have made an excellent leader of the Progressive Liberal Party. I think he is one of the strongest members of the party. And my view is that he fell on his sword in this instance. Because what he said was that after having made his initial statements, he did some research and was told by the financial secretary, I believe, that the recommendation had been made, that the government had decided, the Ministry of Finance had decided that BPL, or that the government could not afford the hedge transactions. That he gave an explanation in the House of Assembly that basically came down to the decision was made not to pursue the hedge transaction, but to go in a different direction. So the call that has subsequently come from the FNM for Sayers to resign is not one that the political review would support, but nevertheless, there it is. Next in the political review from the Northern Bahamas, I just wanted to point this out because it had been the subject of quite a bit of political grandstanding. Struggling straw vendors at the Port Lucaya marketplace are disappointed over the fallout of the sale of the Grand Lucayan Hotel. The fact is, the hotel has not sold. In May of this year, Deputy Prime Minister Chester Cooper, who's the Minister of Tourism, and Grand Bahama Minister Ginger Moxie, along with the board members of Lucayan Renewal Holdings Limited, announced that Electra America Hospitality Group had entered into an agreement to purchase the Grand Lucayan for $100 million and had plans to invest $300 million to develop the property. Earlier this month, Mr. Cooper reported that the deal with the prospective buyer was off after ongoing stalling due to repeated requests for due diligence extensions. So the question now becomes, is this an example of overpromising and under-delivering? Because the impression from the political directorate was that the sale was a done deal. There were just a couple of things that needed to be wrapped up in due diligence, and then fine, we can sell this thing and we can do all this wonderful stuff. And in the Tribune, I believe it was in Friday's Tribune, there was an interesting, and it was a great story about these straw vendors who were still faithful. I mean, they're still hopeful, obviously, but they are disappointed because they were counting on this sale. Everybody in Grand Bahama is counting on the sale of this hotel to revitalize that economy. And so I would encourage the government to be cautious about making promises or seeming to make promises that really don't have any foundation. And this seems to be a case to me where they overpromised and now are forced to backtrack. And I only hope that Cooper, who is also the Minister of Investments, will be successful in finding a successful buyer for this property. And that wraps up our review of the top stories in politics for this week. More happened, but as we've noted, we have a guest today, and we're saving time for the interview. Still, we cannot miss out on this week's Under the Radar. So here's what went, in our view, under the radar this week. And then the political review under the radar, we look at a story that did not get, in our view, enough traction or enough attention in the course of the week, and it may have been overshadowed by other events, but is in itself very important and worth paying attention to. And this week in Under the Radar, a memorandum of understanding was signed between the government and the African Export-Import Bank, allowing the Bahamas to join other Caribbean states in establishing a partnership with that multilateral trade finance institution. Prime Minister Davis described the signing as an historic moment for the Bahamas, adding that it would fill the gap in the region for private sector businesses seeking international funding. The MOU was signed at the office of the Prime Minister, where Financial Secretary Simon Wilson and other banking and executives of the bank, including Head of Trade and Corporate Finance Ayman El-Zogby and Temwa Gondwe, who's the Senior Manager for Trade Facilitation, were in attendance. The African Exim Bank seeks to expand its operation to Caribbean member states through the establishment of the Caribbean Exim Bank, which will provide services to the region, such as trade and project financing, export development, guarantees and trade information, and advisory services. According to Prime Minister Davis, the African Exim Bank will fill the gap in, as we've said, in the region for private sector businesses seeking international funding that's not readily available through the Caribbean Development Bank. The African Exim Bank has indicated that once the regional office has been established, it plans to commit an investment of $700 million in the Caribbean as quickly as possible. Through this, Mr. Davis said the CARICOM community would be able to unlock further economic and social benefits at a critical time when so much support is needed. The African Exim Bank has already started a program, African Caribbean Trade and Investment Promotion Program, for $250 million that is being immediately launched for financing and investments. Among the projects that have been discussed so far involving the bank are things like further developing transportation and poultry farming. There's nothing specific for the Bahamas that has been outlined as yet, but that is surely just down the road. Now I'd like to pivot, and that was under the radar for this week. I have a special sort of feature for this week that I want to use as an introduction to my conversation with our guest. And basically what it is an explanation of something called blue bonds. And what we're talking about here is, well, here's some context, right? Prime Minister Philip Davis has touted the idea of carbon credits from before he became prime minister. It's part of his strategy included in the Blueprint for Change, and it is a major plank in his strategy for creating a new stream of government revenue to finance the incredibly aggressive capital development plans that have been outlined by the Davis administration. The official opposition and honestly many members of the public who are not politically aligned and people in the private sector who have no political dog in the race have asked the question time after time after these big announcements, well, how are you going to pay for that? You're complaining about government, complaining about the lack or absence of revenue in the first place. So how are you going to pay for any of this that you're talking about? A new hospital in Grand Bahama, a new hospital in New Providence. I mean, that's hundreds of millions of dollars. Not to mention any of the other things that they've talked about, right? So Prime Minister Davis's response to this has consistently been, we're going to monetize our carbon sink, our position as a carbon sink, and we're going to use carbon credits to fund all of these developments in large part. Now, I've done 2 shows on carbon credits here on the Political Review, and the facts surrounding carbon credits suggest that there's a little more to it than that. Obviously, an instrument as complicated as that it will take a lot to get it done. At COP27 last week in Egypt, when Prime Minister Davis met with the IMF's managing director, and after the meeting, she made a public statement about working with the Bahamas to create a financing instrument that I think will become what the Prime Minister is talking about when he talks about carbon credits. But I thought it would be very interesting to look at what an organization with a significant presence in the Bahamas has done elsewhere in the region as an option for financing climate change adaptation and mitigation. And so this comes from a conversation that I heard last week, and I thought it was interesting, and I wanted you to listen to it as well. So, Wally, if you could play that clip for us now, that would be great.
Podcast. Climate and debt are deeply intertwined problems. Last month, the United Nations identified 54 countries in need of urgent debt relief. The UN said about half of those countries are also some of the most climate vulnerable nations in the world.
These countries don't have the money to service their debt and invest in climate-related infrastructure. Danielle Munivar is an economic affairs officer at the UN Conference on Trade and Development.
Climate change not only is affecting negatively the income of countries, but is also imposing additional costs as a result of extreme climate events. Because of these linkages, the climate crisis, it's also making the debt crisis worse.
The outlook has only worsened with the pandemic, the strong dollar, and rising interest rates. When governments borrow money in international markets, they usually borrow in US dollars. So a strong dollar means countries have to generate more revenue in their local currencies to keep up with debt payments. But the pandemic wiped out crucial tourism revenue for many countries.
And now governments are faced with swelling debt loads at the same time interest rates are going up around the globe. So these higher borrowing costs have effectively shut out many emerging economies out of international markets.
At the Nature Conservancy, Sherry Constantine and her colleagues wanted to tackle the climate and debt problems together. So they turned to something called a debt for nature swap. Basically, they would help governments swap old debt for new debt with lower interest payments. This debt conversion would then free up money for conservation efforts.
We don't want to just do a one-off project. We want transactions that are transformative and that cause for long-term lasting change. And so the debt conversion was one of the ideas that we had in terms of trying to create that long-term funding stream.
These debt for nature swaps were briefly in vogue in the late 1980s and early 1990s after the Latin American debt crisis. Then environmental groups helped countries like Bolivia and Ecuador get debt relief in exchange for conservation commitments.
Daniel Munevar at the UN studies debt in developing countries, and he says the increasing concern about the overlapping debt and climate problems has made these kinds of deals trendy again.
So debt swaps are being seen as this wonderful magical tool that could solve both problems at the same time.
The Nature Conservancy revived the Debt for Nature swap in 2016 with a deal in the Seychelles. It did another swap in Belize last year, and then a $150 million deal in Barbados this year. The deals all involve something called blue bonds because the countries promised to protect at least 30% of their ocean areas.
And so here's how the Barbados debt swap worked. First, the government contacted investors holding the old debt, and they offered to buy back some of those bonds. In Wall Street lingo, this is called a tender offer. Slav Gatchev heads the sustainable debt team at the Nature Conservancy, and he says that bondholders had two choices.
You have the option of doing nothing, in which case you will continue to hold your position, or you could say, you know what, I kind of like this idea, right, of being able to tender my bond now and get some liquidity, basically to get cash.
Slav says the government got a good response. Lots of bondholders wanted to get cashed out. Now Barbados had to come up with the money to pay them.
Just like the homeowner refinancing their house, if you go to your current bank and say, hey, I want to pay you back, the bank will say, wonderful, where's the cash? Show me the money.
And that's where the Nature Conservancy comes in. They paired up with Wall Street banks and another group, which was the Inter-American Development Bank, and they sold new bonds to investors called the blue bonds. And the proceeds of these blue bonds were then used to cash out the old bondholders.
Now Barbados is on the hook for this new debt, but the new debt has much better terms.
Our blue bond that we arranged with the help of Wall Street banks, that's the kind of the real financial alchemy here.
The financial alchemy was that the Nature Conservancy basically stood in for Barbados. Investors were told, pretend like the Nature Conservancy is borrowing this money. Use the Nature Conservancy's credit rating.
The nonprofit is considered a very safe borrower, so the Nature Conservancy was able to get a lower interest rate for the blue bonds than what Barbados would have gotten if the government had tried to borrow the money itself. The Nature Conservancy and the Inter-American Development Bank also took a risk. They agreed to guarantee the debt, stepping in if Barbados can't make the payments.
All told, the debt swap generated $50 million in savings for Barbados. This is the money that the country is using for large-scale, long-term projects to protect its oceans.
The Nature Conservancy believes these debt for nature swaps can be scaled up and used more widely. Daniel Munevar at the UN Conference for Trade and Development is a little more cautious. He says, picture the world like a big apartment complex where each unit represents a country. Right now, the entire building is engulfed in flames, and the debt swaps are like small home fire extinguishers.
If you have a high degree of climate vulnerability and have a high risk of debt distress, you need to call the fire brigade. We're not going to be able to tackle this if we keep pretending that the home extinguishers are enough.
Slav at the Nature Conservancy acknowledges that debt swaps are just one tool meant to complement traditional philanthropy like grants and donations. But he said the enormity of the climate crisis means financial markets have to get involved in fixing it. And so these debt swaps are designed to attract investors of all kinds, whether they like the low risk or they have sustainable investing goals.
Which side are you appealing to? Kind of their profit-seeking side or their climate conscience?
Ideally, it's both, right? We're primarily appealing to the rational side of investors, but of course, we love the fact that people see these instruments as aligned with their green investment targets, and we want to see more teeth to those targets.
Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, praised the blue bonds as a game changer, but she wants even more action. She's long made the case that the intertwined climate and debt crises faced by countries like hers are new forms of colonialism.
This is the COP that needs action.
Here she is at the opening of the ongoing COP27 summit in Egypt.
This world looks still too much like it did when it was part of an imperialistic empire.
At COP27, Mia Mottley is pushing for change at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. She wants them to prioritize funding for damage caused by climate change and to ease the burdens of some loans. And leaders of wealthy nations are paying attention.
And that is, to me, a fascinating look into the kind of flexibility and creativity that is necessary and available, I believe, to countries like the Bahamas. Barbados is our close neighbor. We've all seen pictures of our politicians very, very friendly and close with Mia Mottley. There are any number of Mia Mottley fans listening to the show today. So it's not out of the realm of expectation, possibility, understanding that the Bahamas might benefit, especially given the presence of the Nature Conservancy here in the country, from these blue bonds or something like it. And just to reiterate, the blue bonds are an instrument created by the Nature Conservancy and the Inter-American Development Bank to sell to bondholders to buy out government debt. And using the Nature Conservancy's credit rating, they were able to secure much lower interest rates than Barbados would have gotten as a country. Critically important, both the Nature Conservancy and the IDB guaranteed the debt. In terms of results, remember now, this project generated $15 million for Barbados, which they're using for long-term ocean conservation planning and projects. Debt swapping like this is one tool that's already proven its utility. And my question really is, instead of talk, which we've done a lot of, what are we really doing? Now, I am very, very happy to welcome back to the Political Review a great friend of mine, a man filled with lion power in his own right, the former Minister of the Environment, a campaigner of long years for environmental affairs, and someone who believes in sustainable development. He is a lawyer by profession, a chemist by education and profession. He is one of the premier authors of environmental impact assessments here in the Caribbean region. He is my friend and your former minister and the former member of parliament for Marathon, one Romy Ferreira, welcome back to the Political Review.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
That's very kind of you to say, sir. Now, Romy, we had discussed talking about FTX and other things, but I kind of wanted to start with the carbon credits and this idea that the Davis administration is promoting, that the creation of the carbon credit instrument will solve all of our revenue problems. And I know that you are, I believe that as a student of the environment and environmental affairs around the world, you would have some thoughts on this. And we'll get to the FTX in short order.
Yes, you asked in the lead up you asked, about blue bonds and what is a blue bond. So let's begin there. The World Bank defines blue bonds as a debt instrument issued by governments, developed by banks or others to raise capital from impact investors to finance marine and ocean-based projects that have like a positive effect on the environment. And clearly, which you alluded to just then, is a form of it when you discussed Barbados. But what I'd like to say is that there was a recent article, because we have to piecemeal together the extent of information that we know in relation to the carbon credit system that's proposed, in relation to the $300 million worth of coastal assets, what are the terms that they're managed under. We have to piece all of this together only from public statements that normally are issued in the newspaper, because no government official, the Prime Minister, nor the Attorney General, nor the Minister of Environment, has sat down with the Bahamian people and explained this process of carbon credits, how we're going to get it, how it was intertwined in the FTX exchange platform, and how it moves forward from there. But there's an article, the National Review, entitled FTX Tentacles Stretch Far Across the Bahamas. And there's a lovely photo caption. And there's an extensive list of donations that were made. But what's not mentioned there is their involvement, the stretching of their tentacles into our carbon credits and the blue economy. Now, for the benefit of your listeners, a carbon credit is an offset credit. All that means is that for every metric ton of carbon dioxide produced by either a developing nation, or a developed nation, or big companies, can be offset by the metric tons of carbon that are contained in the seagrass meadows. In particular, that's the genesis of this one, and of course our coral reefs and our terrestrial forests. But with this one, in piecemealing the information, this is based on the seagrass meadow. So all of the enthusiasm, all of the hype you see on the carbon credits, and all of the formation of the company, it's based on that. And that's what essentially we've been able to glean. So let me, as you encapsulated at the beginning, if you would allow me to give like a brief timeline of what we know based on public statements so far, because most of this is shrouded in secrecy. So what we know in public statements thus far that has been obtained and published in the media. So we know that on the 22nd of July, FTX Digital Bahamas Limited was incorporated as an IBC. How do I know that? That's contained in the affidavit of the government court-appointed liquidator. So it was incorporated here as an IBC. On the 20th of September, 2021, it was registered with the Securities Commission. Now, the next day was the general election. Then you have the first hint of what was going on in relation to our carbon credits. On the 22nd of April, 2022, about 7 months after FTX was registered, FTX Digital Bahamas Limited was registered with the Securities Commission, Brian Pinder, our Attorney General, went on record saying that the government has been approached by people interested in buying carbon credits. He said that the carbon credit bill or the climate change bill is the first step towards this. He said, and is quoted as saying, our responsibility is to maximize the benefits for Bahamians, not to jump on the first opportunity. And then he also said that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Environment would select the management company. That was the 22nd of April, 2022. On the 23rd of June, 2022, Ryan Pinder said, the government is developing legislation to establish a carbon credit exchange in the Bahamas. Legislation will be specifically drafted for this purpose. There will be it will be a vertically integrated carbon credit marketplace. There was no explanation or development of that. It was also, he is on record as saying, the government has identified $300 million worth of coastal assets that is seeking to offer on the global carbon market. So here we have our first glint at the dollar amount that they're eyeing, 300 million, and it's from our Attorney General Ryan Pinder, and he says that the monetization of this would be in the fiscal year 2022-2023. So if you wanted to try and figure out what this is worth, this is your first hint, or this is our first hint that it's worth 300 million. Then on the 10th of July, 2022, at a conference in, I believe it was the Ocean Conference in Lisbon, Portugal, Jerome Fitzgerald, special advisor to the Prime Minister's, I believe he operates in the delivery unit, and a person that is well known to the Bahamian public. He is quoted as saying, the Bahamas is expected to launch the first blue carbon credit from the Bahamas seagrass before the end of 2022. So what he's talking about there is that those same blue carbon credits that we defined in the beginning, that's supposed to be vertically integrated, that's worth about $300 million. He's now linking them to seagrass or thalassia, if we want to be technical, a little bit more technical. It's a seagrass meadow. It's very important. Then he's on record as saying, in the next few months, they expect to launch the country's first carbon exchange through cryptocurrency FTX. And there you have the link between our carbon credits and FTX and the manner of the relationship. Unfortunately, we don't know the details of how far along that was developed. None of this was made public. This is just pronouncements in the newspapers. Then this announcement was made in Portugal, as I said, at the UN Ocean Conference. He also said over the next 2 to 3 months, the scientists would complete mapping of the blue carbon assets. He identified the group beneath the waves. He said that they had approached the government and advised that they had discovered the largest seagrass meadow in the world, in the Bahamas. Jerome Fitzgerald is on record as saying Brave Davis decided the Bahamas would lead the world in moving blue carbon forward, not only in the regulations, but in the monetization as well. And of course, you would lead the world forward based on the Climate Change and Carbon Markets Initiatives Bill 2022, which he said would be tabled by August of 2022. But on the 15th of July, 2022, Prime Minister Davis is recorded in the House of Assembly saying, as he touted the bill, the Davis administration is making history. We will sell blue carbon credits based on seagrass on the carbon market. He identified 1,600 square miles of mangroves and other ecosystems. He announced that the government has entered a heads of agreement with Carbon Management Limited. I believe that's the group. Now, this is for the $300 million in coastal assets. He said that the government will own 49%. The management company, 49%. The NGO, 2%. He outlined that there were 3 unsolicited proposals. He said that the government selected Beneath the Waves, operating under Carbon Management Limited. So if you wanted to know who Carbon Management Limited is, it is Beneath the Waves, and they're operating under Carbon Management Limited. And this is the group who signed the heads of agreement to oversee what has been identified as $300 million in coastal assets. What that means, the entire biological production of that seagrass meadow, its contribution as a carbon sink and absorbing the carbon dioxide that is causing the planet to get warm. All of that has been dollarized at 300 million. This is based on finding the largest seagrass meadow. So that seagrass meadow has been valued at 300 million. And that's been handed over, according to the Prime Minister, to Carbon Management Limited, a selected. And then the heads of agreement was signed. He gave reasons. This is in a newspaper article. We're still quoting newspaper articles here. This is a heads of agreement signed for 3 reasons, he said. Scientists beneath the waves have institutionalized knowledge as a result of shark research. And he said that they discovered the seagrass meadow, and the team includes notable Bahamian financial professions. And of course, they had the most attractive management fee of 15%. He said, we are exploring the opportunity of establishing a carbon exchange in the Bahamas with FTX. So here we have another hint at how it's going to take place. We're going to have this Carbon Management Limited, we'll have Beneath the Waves operating under Carbon Management Limited that owns 49% of the 300 million. They're the ones that are going to approach the carbon exchange, which will be operated by FTX. That's what he's saying. That's the translation of that. And he also indicated that the government is to receive 85% of the upstream revenues.
All right. We need to take a break, Romy. I want to come back to this. Please put a pin where you're at. I have some questions about some things. So I hope that you are prepared to answer questions on what you've said. But we got to take a break. This is the Political Review with your host, Quincy Parker. It is 2 minutes after 5. We're talking to Romuald Ferreira, former Minister of the Environment. And we'll be right back after this short break.
Doctors Hospital, our lamp just got brighter. The Loyalty Advantage membership program now has 3 unique plans to choose from. From Lamp Prepaid with free prime care visits and service line discounts, Lamp Insured with copay waivers and 0 upfront collections at the ER and inpatient services, or our new Lamp Access, a free plan that offers 10% off labs, pharmacy, and imaging. Lamp has a plan for everyone. To sign up, visit our website or give us a call. Doctors Hospital, trusted and best care now.
I used to think of the bank as my personal ATM machine. If I wanted a new car, new furniture, a weekend trip to Miami, no problem, just max out the credit card or top up my loan. I was a big baller until I realized that 75% of my salary was going to pay back all those loans. Fidelity's personal financial coaching was the best solution. Fidelity gave me a plan with a debt consolidation loan that has a built-in savings that pays 5% interest. I now only have one low monthly payment, plus money in my pocket. Give Fidelity Bank a call at 356-7764 in Nassau or 352-6676 in Freeport. Visit any of Fidelity's locations or visit a website at fidelitygroup.com.
Calling all Solomon's Fresh Market and Exuma Markets customers. It's here! My Solomon Smart Rewards, the ultimate loyalty program. It's completely free and easy. Shop at Solomon's Fresh Market or Exuma Markets, scan your card at the register to earn and redeem rewards. Every dollar you spend equals 1 point, and rewards can be earned and redeemed in all participating locations. Don't be left out. Everyone is invited to start saving at amlfoods.com.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's 4 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm talking with Romy Ferreira. You're listening to the Political Review with Quincy Parker. Romy, you had, well, just pick up where you left off, but I have questions about this company, but go ahead.
Well, what we were doing was encapsulating where we are now as a country in relation to our carbon credits and our blue carbon economy. And we can only figure that out based on the public statements. And we were going on public statements made that show the government's intent, in addition to the climate change bill that you and I discussed prior, and which I'll get to. But of course, we left. I mean, this is a good time to pause and I guess to talk, but there are only 3 more points that I wanted to make.
No, go ahead. Yeah, make the point and then we'll come back. Yeah.
That the last date I quoted to you was the 15th of July, and that's taken from Mr. Davis's speech in Parliament when he presented the bill, as reported in the newspapers. And then on the 10th of November 2022, we had the liquidator appointed for FTX Digital Markets Limited. So that's a landmark day right there. But on the 11th of November 2022, our Prime Minister is quoted as saying that Egypt, everybody knows the famous COP event. I think more than 70 people went, but not one of them was the Minister of Environment. But at that particular meeting, he's quoted as saying that the Bahamas approach is the gold standard by which others can benefit. And what do we know about this gold standard? What do we know about this approach? It involves giving away 49% of the coastal assets, worth $300 million, to a company operating under Carbon Management Limited. It involves the government holding on to 49%, and it also involves NGOs having 2%. I mean, this is, we know the structure, and those are to be traded on FTX. So what he's presenting it to the world was that you have that structure, and the carbon exchange would be on FTX. Then you have environment. He also made the, of course, at the same pavilion, you have a quote from Anthony Ferguson. He said that the company has identified, meaning the management company, new natural asset classes that will enter in the market in the coming years. And he reiterated that the environment and social government investments were $2 trillion, so money's moving around in $2 trillion. And he said, and this is after now, after the liquidators announced, he said, this is the day after, that the blue note bonds to issue over the next 12 months. And at the end of 2024, a natural asset company would be listed at the New York Stock Exchange. He's hopeful for that. But more importantly, he said that they are committed to transparency. And that is like the background synopsis of where we can formulate or even frame this discussion in relation to carbon credits, in relation to where we are in monetizing that. And of course, any possible fallout in relation to the ongoing events.
Right. So it's very clear that you have done as thorough a job of research as is possible on the public statements that have been made with regard to this. Have any statements been made as to who Carbon Management Limited is?
I haven't, no, and we tried to obtain a search report, but the file was unavailable. But that's probably because it may be before the judge. I mean, these are extant matters, and I think His Lordship, Lord Winder, is presiding over it. So, but nonetheless, all we know is what the Prime Minister said in his delivery in the House of Assembly. And I want to go back to the quotes because I really don't want to misquote him. But it is basically Carbon Management Limited is Beneath the Waves is operating Carbon Management Limited, and they have 2 Bahamian professionals assigned to it. And so that is the nature of the relationship that we know.
All right. So the way I want to stress this because structure is important in terms of liability, right? So Beneath the Waves plays what role in the carbon credit question?
Well, they're inextricably linked to Carbon Management Limited, but they played a more important role because they discovered the seagrass meadow. And they are a nonprofit organization that has been doing wonderful research in the Bahamas for many, many years, particularly on migratory tiger sharks and the shark population. And they're well known to everyone.
Right.
They discovered the seagrass meadow. And the seagrass meadow, then I would imagine they would have notified the government. I was aware of this when I was minister. So this is, we were aware that they'd made this discovery. So,
right. So do they? So what I'm trying to establish is whether or not they play a commercial or organizational role in the structure that would eventually lead to the creation of a carbon credit.
But we don't know. The Prime Minister didn't disclose that in the House of Assembly. So we don't know. I mean, these are well-put questions to the government. What is the exact nature of the relationship between Beneath the Waves and Carbon Management Limited? Who has the controlling interest? Is it Beneath the Waves? Is it the two Bahamian professionals? Who controls the $300 million in assets? I mean, these are questions that need to be rightfully put to the government, to the Minister of Environment, to the Minister of Finance, to the Prime Minister, to the Attorney General, to Mr. Fitzgerald. They've all commented in the public sphere, but we don't know. The heads of agreement that was signed with Carbon Management Limited, has that been tabled in the House of Assembly? I mean, we don't know. These aren't in the public domain. Does that qualify them as secret? They're certainly not transparent. And we took them to their word because these are notable Bahamian financial professions. They said transparency is the order of the day, but yet we have not seen the heads of agreement between these two entities. We don't really know the exact nature of the relationship because we haven't seen the management documents. And those are questions that only the government can answer those questions.
I appreciate that. I'm posing these questions for that purpose, right? So that people can appreciate and that our listeners can appreciate what questions the government still has yet to answer on this. The two Bahamian professionals that you referred to, have they been identified?
Yes. One of them, I'll pull it up for you, but they've been identified and they've been...
I'm assuming Anthony Ferguson is one of them.
Yes, he's one of them. I'm trying to remember the name of the other good gentleman, but it's listed in the. I'll find it for you and I'll say it. But there are two well-known Bahamian professionals, beyond repute, ill repute. I mean, very famous and very well-known. And this is why it's the statement of Mr. Ferguson, and he's recorded in an article by Paige McCartney. This is where I'm quoting from. It's entitled "Carbon Management Estimates 9 million blue carbon credits by 2030. So that was the headline. And in it, he's discussing all of the things that I attributed to him.
Okay. All right. It's just that I don't want to. Okay. So what you have is a company.
Anthony Ferguson is listed as the director of Carbon Management Limited in this article, and so would the other gentleman.
Okay. I know Tony well. He's a smart guy.
Of course. Beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah. So you have this company, Carbon Management Limited, that has signed a heads of agreement with the government of the Bahamas.
Correct.
That heads of agreement has not been tabled or made public as far as we are aware.
No, it's not been.
This company is responsible for piloting the creation of the carbon credit that the Prime Minister is betting all of his eggs on.
Correct.
And that carbon credit was supposed to be traded on the FTX exchange with cryptocurrency as the primary method of trade.
But the Prime Minister isn't quoted as saying that cryptocurrency is the primary method of exchange. What he is quoted as saying is that it would be operated through an FTX exchange. Right. FTX only deals in cryptocurrency, so it makes the necessary implication that parts of our carbon credit scheme were envisioned to be through cryptocurrency, because you have Fitzgerald announcing it and the Prime Minister reinforcing it. Fitzgerald announcing the relationship just before the Prime Minister made the announcement. And so obviously they would have envisioned at that point, I mean, it's only logical to infer that they would have envisioned some sort of cryptocurrency in the mix because they approached a cryptocurrency broker, one of the biggest, FTX. And you said at the beginning that there were 134 subsidiaries under FTX. And in the affidavit, it's interesting, I read the same thing in the affidavit of Brian Sims, King's Counsel, who is the court-appointed liquidator. He said that there were 134 companies, and he also said, interestingly enough, like, notwithstanding the corporate arrangements, all of the decisions were made from FTX Bahamas. That's what he's on the record as saying in the federal court matter that's ongoing. So, notwithstanding all of this corporate structure that was had, the Bahamas is still very central to all of this because, well, the assertion is that all the decision-making was done by persons who were domiciled here at the time. And then we have a company that's domiciled here with a structure that's making decisions. And so we have, that's to give your listeners, a full balance because there's a lot going on here. Some of it is complicated. Some of it is not so complicated. We could also make the distinction between the blue bond, that debt swap that Mia Motley did in Barbados. Those are really just loan arrangements with lower interest rate. And the split in the interest rate is what you use for the development of climate change infrastructure. What we are proposing is that we found this seagrass bed. The waves found this seagrass bed. This seagrass bed is worth $300 million. Former Minister Fitzgerald, he also indicated that they were in the process of verifying this $300 million, but this obviously they must be to the stage where he could admit this publicly that it's worth $300 million unless something else is going on. So 300 million thereabouts, and they're trying to verify it, but it's based on that. It's based on a living biological system, which is very different from an existing debt that's been swapped out for debt with a lower rate. And so by doing that, they essentially handed over all of the biological generating capacity of the largest seagrass meadow, which is really owned by the Prime Minister. It's subterranean land. It's owned by Prime Minister on trust for the benefit of the Bahamian people, according to the law. He's the Minister of Crown Lands. He appoints that on trust for the benefit of the Bahamian people. So the very principle would be, is this for the benefit of the Bahamian people? Do we have enough information to make an informed decision? And much of this is shrouded in secrecy, and this is why we have to keep pressing, because we have to find out the information. We want to know the degree of exposure. How exposed are we as a country, particularly with our carbon credits? We have announced globally, on the world stage, that we are married to the hip in terms of our carbon credits are going to be on the FTX exchange. What would the fallout of this be? I mean, there are questions that need to be answered. And really, the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Environment and the Attorney General, I mean, they ought to lead the way. Because remember, at the beginning of all this foray, when they came to office, they described our environmental track record as the worst. I believe the Attorney General described it as that. I don't want to misquote him, but I do believe he's on record as saying that. Notwithstanding the dump isn't on fire now, which is interesting. Notwithstanding we have a legislative framework and plastics are banned. But this particular issue is a very important issue because it speaks to our natural assets. It speaks to our natural resources. And all of the carbon swaps and all of the blue bonds and all of the carbon offset trading and the carbon credits, they're all based on our natural resources. They're based on our coral reefs, our seagrass meadows, and to a lesser extent, our pine forests and our terrestrial forests. So all of them are based on that. And if the finding is that the largest seagrass meadow is in the Bahamas, we already know that we have the third and fourth largest barrier reef systems in the world. Those stand to be monetized too. So the question is, how much are they worth? Are they under the ambit? What is the nature of the management relation between the FTX exchange and Carbon Management Limited and the government? What is the nature of that corporate relationship? How are these assets, how did they envision it to be managed? Because if we didn't have the liquidation The liquidation is a huge interrupter effect. If we didn't have the liquidation, we wouldn't be discussing this right now. This has only come to head because of the liquidation and the ongoing saga. But it's good that it's come to head now because we need to understand it. And then so we could make sure that something like this is never repeated.
So, all right. So to be clear, the fact is that the Prime Minister's not his entire revenue strategy, but a significant part of the Prime Minister's revenue strategy revolves around carbon credits. And his strategy around carbon credits revolved around FTX. So the collapse of FTX has significant and very pertinent relevance for the Prime Minister's carbon credit strategy. Is that, based on your reading and based on the public utterances, that's a fair statement?
Yeah, that's very fair, based on the public utterances. And they haven't come back to qualify anything, but that's very fair. And that's based on the comments made by Fitzgerald and the comments made by the Prime Minister in the House of Assembly when he actually debated the bill and he was touting it. But that was before he knew what he knew now. So that's when they were all optimistic and they were proud to announce their association with FTX. Remember, there was no reason not to feel proud. They were making gifts, they were philanthropy. I mean, they were all over the place. So there was no need not to feel proud at this point. And he, in that moment, was when he disclosed all of this in the House of Assembly. Davis said that the government entered into a heads of agreement with Carbon Management Limited, which comprises a team including scientists from beneath the waves who are spearheading the mapping of the Bahamian carbon assets, and the Bahamas Bahamian security and capital market experts, Anthony Ferguson and Antoine Bastien.
Antoine, okay, I know that.
This is what he said in the House of Assembly on the 14th. He would have tabled, this would have been reported in the newspapers on the 15th. So this is all we have to go by, because remember, we don't know what's in the heads of agreement. The exact relationship between the two entities. We don't know how many directors are involved, who has the control. We don't know how the voting interests are. All of these are unanswered questions. If you have a vote, for example, because remember when you and I were talking about the climate change bill earlier this year, I mentioned to you that the climate change bill was fraught with problems because the management company was majority government controlled. And that the donor countries, the donor entities, the countries that want to buy carbon credits, typically do not do business with government controlled entities. I also referenced the example in Africa where there was a large delegation left and went to Africa, and they went to look at the forest there and how Norway is funding the preservation of the forest for them to maintain that as a carbon sink. And how they were able to achieve that only because the government is not involved in it whatsoever. I said that our model has heavy government involvement, and they would be challenged under that kind of model to attract bonds. So control of Carbon Management Limited, who the directors are, the kind of vote they have, and they vote. I mean, all of this corporate structure control is going to be really pivotal to understand the exact nature of the relationship. But as it stands now, what we know is that Beneath the Waves operating under Carbon Management Limited has 49% stake. The government of the Bahamas has another 49 and 2%, but we don't know the dynamics between how that works. Those are legitimate questions I would imagine the press corps have been asking, but to which we've gotten no response, because I can't see nobody not asking them. Perhaps no one has just responded.
I plead the fifth. Romy, we have a call. Usually when we do interviews, we don't do calls, but do you mind if we take this call?
I don't mind at all.
Excellent. All right. Well, in that case, caller, welcome to the Political Review. Thank you very much for joining us. What's on your mind?
Yeah, what's the name of the show?
The political review.
You sure they named the F&M review? Because all you put on is F&M. That's why they fire Awesome.
Thank you very much for your call, caller. I appreciate you. May God bless you and your family in this rough time in this country. And no sarcasm, no shade. I mean that sincerely.
Well, in response to that call, I'd like to quote Friedrich Nietzsche, who said that. I could hear what he said, but he said that sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because it will shatter their beliefs. All of what we have spoken here is from public reports that were uttered by these individuals in the Tribune, in the Guardian, and of course, in the Bahamas Chronicle. They're all verifiable. I have a big stack of them sitting right in front of me. So all I'm doing is reciting the words that our leadership has used and calling them to give account based on their own words. That's it. Now, if they don't stand by those words anymore, then I think they can offer the Bahamian public an explanation as to what changed their minds. And I'm not one of those people that believes that they're not allowed to change their mind, but if they have, they need to come clean and explain the nuances that are going on here, because a lot is at stake. This is $300 million of coastal assets that belong to the Bahamian people. This is $300 million of coastal assets that is supposed to supply the public trust whereby all Bahamians can benefit. So these are very important issues. The Prime Minister has made this a linchpin of his administration, of his quest for global leadership. It's a very important issue. It demands clarity. To what extent are our carbon credits and the whole exchange in jeopardy because you made the utterances or the fact that they were to be traded on the FTX exchange? That must have an impact. What is that impact? And we should have frank and truthful discussion on what that would be.
The caller's point had nothing to do with you, Romy. He was mad at me, and that's okay. They fired my ass, according to him. I'm sure the rest of his sentence was from BPL, and that's okay. That's okay.
I mean, they fired me from Marathon too. If there's any consolation.
There's no consolation necessary. No consolation.
Yeah, man. It's my sense of humor. It gets the best of me sometimes.
Yeah. But for him and for people like him, I appreciate that you may feel a way. You have every right to feel the way you do. But this is not about FNM or PLP. Frankly speaking, I want to make it very clear. The government of the Bahamas is the government of the Bahamas. They govern on behalf of FNMs, PLPs, DNAs, Coalition of Independents, non-aligned, people who aren't interested in politics. Brave Davis is not just the PLP prime minister, he's my prime minister as well.
Mine too.
FTX did not just affect the PLP. FTX and its collapse affects the country that I live in, the country that I call home, the country that my daughter and my family belong to. This is not an FNM issue. This is a Bahamas issue. And if you can't take, frankly speaking, if you can't take the heat, change the damn channel. Okay? If you don't like it, just don't listen. Sorry. Now, apologize. I apologize for that. So, Romy, you shouldn't have had to hear me say things like that to my listener, but God bless him anyway.
Never mind that. I had a similar encounter at an interview with Nahaja Black. It was very exciting. I remember it well.
Yeah, Nahaja she don't mince words, so that must have been fun. All right, so getting back to it, and this kind of circles us around to talking about FTX, right? Is that there's a question of I don't know, and maybe having been in government, having sat in the cabinet, you can give me some guidance on this, right? But is it, because my view at this point is that there's a question of judgment involved, right? There's a question of I don't know what due diligence could have been done on FTX, given how new it is, but you had to see Sam Friedman in a meeting with the President of the United States, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, and him chilling in T-shirt and jeans with these two world leaders. You had to ask yourself some questions, right? You had to ask yourself some questions, given that this young man has yet to breach 30 years old. You have to ask yourself, can I yoke in good conscience my plan for financing the new hospital that I promised my people to this man's admittedly wild and out there dream talk? I feel like because the government's judgment is going to come under extreme scrutiny in this regard, if it has not already done so. And since you were there, you can tell me, did somebody try to talk Brave out of this? Did somebody try to talk him out of going forward with FTX as the poster child for the DARE Act?
The thing is he would have been seduced. You know, the government of the Bahamas would have been seduced like many other persons, I would imagine, by the management at FTX, whoever they met. And of course, they were connected with the right people. So the fact of the matter is that we are at this juncture now. So if he didn't know that before, when he announced it in the House of Assembly that our carbon credits would be exchanged on the FTX exchange, he knows it now. And so we need an explanation now as to what do you intend to pivot to? How do you intend to trade these carbons? What are the falling out? If you are so confident that your dealings are transparent and on behalf of the Bahamian people, and you didn't, as Mr. Ryan Pinder jump on the first bandwagon, then you need to come clean and show us the documents so we can make that determination for ourselves. The thing is that in any population of people, as you said at the beginning, he's everyone's prime minister, and he's the prime minister for those who didn't vote for him, and this is a government for those, people who could actually understand the finer details of what they say. So they should disclose it and not just lump every Bahamian into one category as undeciphering. I mean, that's what's so arrogant about it, right? And the high-handedness of it all. So we're only finding out this. And this is a $300 million asset. Just think about that. This is, according to him, a $300 million coastal asset. It's not chum change we're talking about here. And then I would imagine he would have, any logical thinker would be thinking, well, we have the second largest coral reef. I wonder how much that's worth. We got the third largest. I'm talking about in the Atlantic, behind Belize. We have all of these pine forests. What are our endemic birds? What is the warblers? I mean, all of that has to be a part of the discussion. And what they're talking about is our living biology, all of our plants, whether they're in the sea or under the ground, all of our animals, our oceans, our land. They're talking about all of the natural resources as we defined in the last administration under the legislation that we passed. All of that is what's at stake here. And that's why it's so critical. This is not a small issue, certainly on the environment front. This is a huge issue, and it deserves to have the attention focused on it, and it deserves the necessary answers. Because remember, the Bahamas leading the way in environment is nothing new. We had the world's first land and sea park. If you read the book by Gail Saunders, Islanders in the Stream, and Michael Creighton, you'll see that the Lutheran adventurers passed laws to preserve turtles and conchs in the 1600s. I mean, leading the way in preservation and the environment we're known for that. And so this would be continuing a long-standing tradition. I'm not denying that, but something went wrong. And if we're to move forward, we need to understand the what went wrong part, and we need to clean that up. And that right there, the decision-making process that led them to select FTX, that's what begs the scrutiny. Why them? There was no RFP for this. There was no going out to the public. There was no public engagement that this was going to happen. Anyone have comments? Any other Bahamian groups want to put bids in? There were 3 unsolicited bids, and they picked the best one.
But Romy, did they pick the best one? That's the question.
Well, that's the question. They picked that was the logic they thought at the time, that it was the best one. But clearly their rationale and reasoning was wrong, because it's not the best one, because their exchange collapsed. So now they have to pivot and figure out how they're going to trade these, if they're going to still go with cryptocurrency, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure that's what they're trying to do. But the fact of the matter is that they made that decision, and all they're doing is backpedaling and basically not providing the necessary information.
Yeah, let me throw some figures at you, right? Because you threw some figures at me. The main figure you keep throwing at me is $300 million.
$300 million.
You talk about a $300 million asset.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if there had been a signing with the group that wanted to buy the Grand Lucayan, there would have been a ceremony at the office of the Prime Minister, a ceremony at the office of the Prime Minister in Grand Bahama, a ceremony at the property, and there would be news reportage, there would be ads, there would be social media blasts. Fred Mitchell would be talking about it in his daily missive to the PLP supporters that he sends out every morning via WhatsApp. We would not have heard the end of that, and that would have been a heads of agreement signed for a $100 million project. We've seen heads of agreements touted for projects valued around $50 to $70 million. We've seen heads of agreements touted for projects that cost less than $1 million. So how is it? What rationale could possibly exist for a heads of agreement which covers a $300 million asset not to be publicized in this country? What possible rationale could exist?
I think that's a question that has to squarely lays on the feet of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Environment and the Attorney General and Mr. Jerome Fitzgerald, the environmental specialist in the OPM.
Let's stop. Let's stop. Okay. Vaughn Miller is a friend of mine. I've known Vaughn from I was a teenager, when I was a DJ, and I used to DJ Christian parties, and Vaughn used to do the same thing, and he was on ZNS. I know Vaughn from long, when I was skinny and young, I know Vaughn. Okay? So
gotcha.
I consider Vaughn my boy. That's my spa, that's my boy. He has been sidelined most definitively. And in my view, serves no purpose in the Davis cabinet as a minister of the environment, not through any fault of his own, but because the administration has signed it. The fact that they went to COP27 and didn't carry Vaughn Miller as the minister of the environment tells you everything you need to know about the value that the administration places on Vaughn Miller. So you keep talking about the Minister of the Environment, I would encourage you to separate him from this discussion, because very clearly he's not involved.
The problem I have with that is that the legislation I left in place, the 12 of them, well, they put the Minister of Environment in charge, right? He has authority and he has a duty to act under the Environmental Planning and Protection Act and under the Ministry of Environment Act. He cannot shirk his duty, notwithstanding the fact that he may find himself sidelined to whatever extent, because none of these pronouncements are coming from him. Ryan Pinder was the one who said it's worth $300 million. Jerome Fitzgerald, as a matter of fact, he was at the United Nations Ocean Conference. It wasn't the Minister of Environment that was there. It was Jerome Fitzgerald that was there in Portugal making this announcement. He's in the Prime Minister's delivery unit. So it's him making this. In a twist of ironic fate, he's making a major environmental pronouncement. So maybe he was seeking redemption, who knows, But one thing is for sure, it wasn't the Minister of Environment making this pronouncement. This pronouncement was made in Portugal by Jerome Fitzgerald on the 10th of July, 2022, as how it's reported in the newspaper. I'm looking at it right now, in case any of your listeners want me to go into more detail. But it's very interesting. It's very interesting to see, to watch it all play out. And this is part of why I don't trust the process. This is why I have deep mistrust of the process. You have the corporate structure that I know is flawed. And I base that on being a marine ecologist, practicing for 30 plus years, marine ecology in this country, and along with law over 20. I know that was flawed, and this is what compelled me to go on the radio. Now we have other issues. We have the involvement of FTX. We got the 300 million that in the heads of agreement. I mean, and on it goes. And then we don't hear anything from the Minister of Environment. I mean, we hear nothing. We don't hear anything now from the Attorney General, Ryan Pinde. He was a big promoter of this in April. There are multiple press conferences with his face on it. Now you hear nothing. No explanation as to what's going on. Nothing from the Prime Minister. He went to Egypt, sat at the pavilion, and touted his plan on the 11th of November, the day after they went into bankruptcy. Yet we hear nothing. And the questions continue to linger and they will mount. So I think it's better that if they have anything to disclose to the Bahamian public, that they do it now before, through the process of a trial, it comes out.
So from 2005 to this year, the European Union emissions trading system, which is the world's largest cap and trade greenhouse gas emissions market, records a value for each carbon credit, right? What the European equivalent would be. The actual value per credit is 72.47 euro. That's about $80. And the highest is that it's ever been, which is not now, was 99.22 euro, which is about $105, $106, right? Mm-hmm. So how are we going to get to the $250 million, let's say, that would be required to build a hospital in Grand Bahama? Or the $300 and some million is going to require to build a hospital in New Providence? And I picked those numbers based on my research for how much was spent over the years to have what we have now.
Yeah.
So these carbon credits are, on average, less than $100 per credit. Some as low as $50, my research has shown $50 US per credit in some places around the world. So what are we talking about in terms of the mechanism for earning revenue from carbon credits? As an environmentalist and a scientist and a man who loves to do some research, can you walk us through how you monetize or how you make money from carbon credits? How much carbon emissions do you have to offset to make significant money?
Okay, so one carbon credit is 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide.
Right.
So for every metric ton of carbon dioxide produced by the developed nations of the world or by big companies, for every metric ton that's produced, that has a corresponding value in a metric ton offset based on the carbon sink potential, based on the primary production quotients, based on the ecological forcing factors of a particular ecosystem. So in this particular case, we pegged our seagrass meadow at 300,000. So that math would be, well, 50 to 80 into your $300 million value to give you an idea of the share. But that's how it'll work. And you would have companies or governments then who are polluters right? And they're polluters because they produce energy. So everybody, every citizen, every person, every building has an energy footprint. And that is the grams of carbon dioxide produced per kilowatt hour of electricity. So everybody, I mean, that is the quotient that is the magic marker. And everybody has one of these. This is their carbon footprint. But obviously countries have a much bigger carbon footprint. And of course, heavy industry, big industrial giants certainly do. And what they want to do is they may not have the money, or at this time they can't upgrade their equipment or switch to solar or do whatever it takes to reduce their carbon. So they seek to buy those credits. And you're quite right. Largely, the European nations and the European Union has been a driver of this. You're absolutely right. And by the rules of the European Union, they tend not to do business with management companies that are government-owned. And this is why we had to amend the legislation in the Bahamas Protected Areas Trust Fund. This is one of the things I did along with the Bahamas National Trust Amendment Act. This is why we had to do it. We had to do it because the government board appointed under the PLP was really a government board and they couldn't attract financing. Because the European governments do not give away money under the Green Shield to entities that are owned majority by government. And this is the big challenge. We couldn't get funding from the German Development Bank. So the question really is, under this regime that they signed us our carbon credits over, our 300 million over on the FTX exchange, the really question is, how does that correlate?
And that's my question, right? Is I want to see the government layout, because I've done my own research. The World Bank has some very interesting information about countries that earn from carbon credits, right? There was something in as far back as 2014, Kenyans are earning carbon credits from sustainable farming, right? But I want to see what they are saying is our potential earning from the carbon credit system that would justify the Prime Minister's optimism about how this system will be able to pay for the kinds of capital projects and revenue-intensive projects that he is suggesting will be facilitated by the carbon credit process. Because right now, I don't see it. Am I looking in the wrong place? Did I get it wrong?
I think those are questions that remain part of the hundreds that have been unanswered by this government in relation to the carbon credits, the whole system. Like I said, I've only been able to piecemeal and share this with the Bahamian public through just gleaning off the newspaper and following the subject matter. And I know that a lot of Bahamians are probably not interested in the subject matter, but I certainly am. And this is why I follow it. But it has tremendous implications. He mentioned 1,600 acres that can also be monetized, which this is obviously a part of. So obviously there's more out there. The Beneath the Waves is to continue or to finish their mapping according to government pronouncements. Remember, Fitzgerald said that they hadn't quite finished their map and they were in the process of finishing their mapping. Have they finished? What's the dollar value? We don't know. We know that one time ago, all of this began with government with something called the GLUED report, which mapped our resources. And there have been systematic mapping of our resources. But in the advent of GPS and in the advent of putting cameras on very large sea creatures that move around and migrate, and sometimes smaller ones, scientists have been able to discover feeding grounds where these animals go. And no doubt, that's how they discovered the seagrass meadow. This is obviously a feeding ground of whatever migratory shark that they were tracking. And there will be lots more to be found in the Bahamas, because remember, I said this on your show, we are a big ocean, small island nation. And based on the size of our ocean and land, we're about the size of Spain. So that's a huge area. And we have coastal banks everywhere. So in other words, we have areas where light can penetrate, and all of this is based on sunlight. So it stands to reason that we probably have the biggest mangrove flats, certainly the biggest bonefish area, certainly the seagrass meadows, certainly the coral reefs. All of these are part of the natural resources that have a value. And we need the answer to these questions, because we're not talking about anything insignificant here.
That's my question for the government. Among the other questions that we've raised today, is make it make sense for the average Bahamian, right? How exactly are we? What is the system? What's the math? How are we gonna realize that $300 million that you're talking about? Because writing it on paper is wonderful, but seeing it in the bank is a different story. And I would like to know what the mechanism is and how the valuation works that proves the benefit that carbon credits will be to the Bahamas. I need to see it. Because at this point, from the things that I've read and the research and studying that I've done, I don't see it. So, and I'm sure that the Prime Minister would not have. I mean, Bray was a brilliant fellow. He's been around a long time. He's not going to leave himself with egg on his face in a way like that is entirely preventable just with a little bit of research. So obviously, he has some calculations. I'm suggesting that it's time to make those public. I'm suggesting that it's time to come to the public and just put everything in the public arena. And if people don't understand, then fine, they don't understand. But for the ones who are interested and who need to be convinced, if your math is solid and you can convince people, then what is the problem? Why not do it? That's my question. Why not put it all in the public domain?
Unless you don't want it in the public domain, unless you're not accustomed to operating where all of the aspects of your governance, is in the public domain. I mean, those are legitimate questions. What I find interesting is that the Attorney General is quoted as saying that I love this article. Listen what he's saying. Our responsibility is to maximize benefits for Bahamians, not to jump on the first opportunity. So that begs the question. FTX exchange, was that the first opportunity? Were they the first cryptocurrency that approached you for trading of our carbon credits? Or was this the first opportunity that you jumped on? I mean, all kind of questions are begged to be answered. The $300 million in coastal assets that I mentioned, that he said on the 23rd of June, the government had valued, we don't see in the legislation produced so far on climate change how these are linked. We don't see any of that. In other words, we don't see the supporting framework to give effect and expression to what he's saying. And as long as it doesn't have the supporting regulatory framework, as long as it doesn't have the sinews and muscles on the bone to make that skeleton move, then it's really lethargic, inept, and inert. And it's really doing nothing and going nowhere, and it amounts to empty political rhetoric.
Are we not, listen, we're so tired of empty political rhetoric. We are so done with empty political rhetoric. We really, really are. I have 6 minutes left, Romy, to ask you about FTX. That wasn't my intent.
Oh. Right. Okay.
But let me put it to you that what's happening with FTX. I was arguing the day before yesterday with some friends that there is no way that what is happening with FTX is going to give the Bahamas a black eye. My argument was that the Bahamas is going to come through this with a reputation as a stellar jurisdiction, and that the DARE Act will be vindicated, and that the integrity of our regulations and our regulators would be upheld in the international arena. Then I did some reading today, and my faith was severely shaken. Was I wrong to lose faith?
I'll begin by saying this. The DARE Act is not in question. The due diligence of this government in vetting FTX and in selecting them as the exchange for the carbon credits, that's what's in question here. There's nothing wrong with the DARE Act. The DARE Act attracted the business, but it's up to the government to vet it. Obviously, Digital Bahamas Assets Limited, if they made an application to the Bahamas government, they would have had financials that they would have presented to cabinet. Those financials would have been gone over, no doubt, by the Ministry of Finance. We have a very astute and able, Secretary of Finance. He would have most likely gone over that and gone over those numbers. So we need to understand kind of like, why didn't they detect that? This is a part of the discussion. In page 37 of the affidavit deposed by Brian Cecil Sims, King's Counsel, he says, paragraph 37, I'm quoting the entire thing. Despite the seemingly complex structure of the FTX brand of companies, the entire FTX brand was ultimately operated from a single location, the Bahamas. All core management personnel likewise were located in the Bahamas. So you tell me, if that is a present fact, a prevailing truth, and a very, very self-evident feature of their facticity, then you can't separate the Bahamas from this. Because here you have the court-appointed liquidator. This is the court-appointed liquidator, the Securities Commission lawyer. This is what he's saying. And that's him in his affidavit. All core management personnel likewise were located in the Bahamas. FTX brand was ultimately operated from a single location. So I did that. I just Google searched the Delaware. I invite your listeners to do it themselves. Don't take my word for it. You can Google search all of this. It comes right up.
Yep.
Because it's a federal case. And
Yes,
in the federal jurisdiction, they make it all public.
It's all
not like
right
here.
there. Mm-hmm.
It's all right there. You just, need to know where to look and have the wherewithal to look and the desire to look. But it's all right there. So it's not like our judicial system where we don't know some of these pronouncements because they're not made public in that sense. You have to go and search. These pronouncements are made public. And so too will be what comes out at the trial. And if our position is all the decisions were made in the Bahamas, that puts the Bahamas as the linchpin, the fulcrum, the pivot point. So it's difficult to see how we would not come under scrutiny or how our reputation would somehow not be tarnished. The question is, what do we do from here? I mean, the Bahamas has faced tarnished reputation before. I mean, Prime Minister Ingram had to deal with that in 1992, restore the good reputation of the Bahamas. This is something on the horizon that may need restoration. And so this is very critical. And so we must pay attention to it.
I will let that be the last word for today's show, because I don't want to disturb the facticity of Mr. Ferreira's most recent comment. As you may have gathered, I love that word, facticity. It means the quality of being a fact. And it's a beautiful word. And thus we end. Mr. Ferreira, thank you for your time and your energy on today's show. You are a good and kind man, and I believe that we will probably end up having more than one follow-up conversation from this over the next few weeks as this plays out.
I'll stay tuned, and thank you for having me. Good evening.
Thank you. And folks, that's going to do it for the Political Review for today, Sunday, the 20th day of November, 2022. I'm your host, Kyle Quincy Parker. To my son, my beloved boy, who went home to be with Jesus 10 years ago today, I love you. I miss you every day, son. And the next voice that will grace your ears for any length of time is Lady T. Let's Talk Together in English is up next. Until next week, God bless. Thanks, Wally. Great job as usual. See you next week, folks.